One. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's live with us right now or in the recording. My name is Danny Le. I am a librarian here at the Santa Clara City Library, and we have such a special talk today with the author of Alligator and Other Stories, Dima Alzayat. She was born in Damascus, Syria, and grew up in San Jose, California, where I'm from. Her short story collection, Alligator and Other Stories, was published by $2 Radio in the US and Picador in the UK, and was a finalist for the 2021 Penn Robert W. Bingham Award in Debut Short Story Collection, and a 2021 Swansea University Dylan Thomas Prize, and the 2021, so many awards. You know, I had to shave these down. There's like 30 awards. I was like, the James Tait Black Memorial Prize, amongst other esteemed awards in her career. Her stories have appeared in BBC Radio 4 and in Esquire, in Undrot Journal, Perry Schooner, Bristol Short Story Award Anthology, the Bridgewater Prize Anthology, and Immigrant, I think, is that what pronunciation is. However, sorry if I'm wrong. Her short story, In the Land of Canaan, was included in artist Jenny Holzer's 2017 projection for Aarhus, and was part of Holzer's 2017 exhibition in the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. She holds a PhD in creative writing from Lancaster University. And without further ado, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Dima. Sorry, I had to just spout out. I'm worried.
Thanks, Danny. That was a good intro.
Bios, someday I'm gonna hire somebody else or one of my colleagues to come in, do the bio for me. Let me just do the rest of this because I can lose my breath, forget to breathe. All right. But anyways, congratulations are in order for all the good energy that has been, funneling your way since the book's release. Despite it coming out during a global pandemic, your collection has been, kind of turning heads all over the world. So tell us how you were feeling during the publication of Alligator and Other Stories, since this was your debut collection.
Well, it is, the book came out 2 months after the outbreak of the pandemic. And I've actually never had an in-person event. So sometimes I forget that there's an actual book out in the world, so it's just, it hasn't been a normal, I think, experience in that way. Like, I've never done in-person publicity events or whatever. And in some way I like that, because I'm like, well, the book's out there and it just does its own thing, and hopefully people find it. But it has felt, and because of that, I think I'm always really shocked if anyone tells me they've read it, or that they've come across it, or they like a story in it, and I'm like, wait, what? How? And I have to remember, no, it's still the physical object is still out there, even if I'm not out there ever with it. So it's been interesting, and I'm sure other people who've had books come out at the same time have all had that same experience. And I know at the beginning there was a lot of a worry over do people find a book if the author's not out there promoting it, and especially at the beginning and during a release, and especially the way publishing works now, it's you really got to hype a book right when it comes out for people to find it. But I don't know, I kind of just never was that stressed about it. I don't know. I think because
amazing
stories over such a long period of time, I always felt no one will read these, they're just for me. And so, yeah, I'm really happy with where it's at.
Oh, you should be. And I know you probably some of the feelings that you had, would this be discovered? Trust me, my own story, as I mentioned to you earlier, with your last name being an A and that green cover, I was going through the stacks, and it popped out in my eyes amongst all the thousands of books. And when I pulled it and read the bio and knew that you're also from San Jose, I just said, I'm going to take a chance. And I think that's the beauty of libraries in that sense. If you discover something that, draws you in, and that's why I always say good design on your book helps a lot.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I fought for this. Well, not fought, but I pushed for this.
Yeah, and they say never judge a book by. I'm like, yo, we do judge a book by its cover. Now, if the book, we pull it from the shelves because of the design, and the contents match up, heck yeah, you good, you good. But that's what it draws me in, is that your book, the collection of stories, just the depth of your writing, really kept me going, because the way you described your characters and the way you wrote them, you do interject about things about their ethnic background, of their beliefs, but also you given them their own identity that doesn't have to be so adhere to their background, or their past. And they're all fighting to find their identity, and break through that, whether it's in ownership of their past, of who they are, or in the marriage of the new future. But just talking more about who you are. So you were born in Damascus, Syria, but but you did grow up here in the South Bay area. So can you talk about a little about how your family came to be in San Jose, and also some of the reasons they came here. Also, maybe some memories of growing up here, in San Jose before you moved out in your late teens.
Yeah. So my mom's family was living in San Jose when we were still in Syria. And so were some of my uncles on my mom's side and stuff. So I think, my parents, moved to San Jose because for the same reason, probably so many immigrants moved to the US, like more opportunities for their kids and more, really that. And my grandma was there, so we ended up in the Bay Area. Right before that, she was in Jersey though, so I was this close to being a Jersey girl, but So grew up in San Jose. I actually really it's so weird because growing up, all I wanted to do was leave San Jose. I was like, get me the hell out of this place. But since leaving, I think so fondly of it, and I think what a great place to have grown up, and especially for as an immigrant child, and that I grew up with so many friends who also had parents that had immigrated. They were all first or second generation. I grew up, hearing Spanish and Vietnamese and so many different languages, and it wasn't weird for people's parents to not speak English, or to speak it with heavily accented, and so in that way, I think I was really lucky in that way to grow up in that kind of environment, because it really it helped me feel at home really quickly. Whereas I think if I probably grew up in some really heavily white town in America, I don't know that would have been my experience, So I don't know. I mean, I lived in San Jose before San Jose was $2 million, 600 square feet houses. So it was before the Santana Row and all the ritzy stuff that's there now. It was just, I don't know, it was cool though, I mean, I was never cool, but I knew and saw cool people. And I loved what a mixture of cultures there were, and how exposed I felt to Mexican American culture, and especially Vietnamese American culture. I would say those two things were really formative in in how I grew up and how what I saw as America or Americans. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I lived behind the Toys R Us that used to be there on Winter, everybody knows.
So yes.
That's and there was nothing but a field there, and now it's expensive apartments and high rises. So it's a different San Jose for sure. But I don't know. All good things though.
It's always good things. We just have to pivot. Unfortunately, everything you said was not hyperbole, but actual reality, and it's pretty sad. But we will march on and find a way, right?
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing some of your early memories and some of the inspiration and experiences you had here in the South Bay. But What were also your early influences in terms of your craft? Was storytelling something that was always a part of your daily life, whether culturally, religiously, or was it media driven? And did your experience help to in one way or another shape your early writing as a youth or a young adult, and also maybe falling into some of the stories in this book?
So, like, I didn't actually come to writing or like writing fiction for a really long time. Like, I always wrote a lot growing up, and I always liked it, but I just never thought that that was like a thing that you did with your life. And it just never occurred to me. Like, I just, I read a lot as a kid, but then there was like this period of time where right after college, especially, where I was like working in the film industry and super busy and
Mm,
underpaid and starving. And I actually didn't read, I think, for like a few years, which is really weird now to think about it. But like, it became like not a part of my life at all. And it was only it, after I became, I guess, quite disillusioned with this career that I was trying to achieve in the film industry, that I started more seriously thinking about like what what am I passionate about, or what do I care about? Um, and it still was a journey from there. Like, I knew I wanted to write, and I thought, okay, maybe journalism, and I ended up working as an editorial assistant at the LA Times and had some opportunities there to write. And that, I think, kind of was really important for me, because it was while I was there that I realized, okay, it's writing, but it's not this writing, and
mm,
started reading again, and started thinking about all the books and stories that I used to really love, but also I guess what I wasn't seeing, which is like, Arab Americans really in that book
mm,
portrayed in the same way that I felt like there of course there's loads of Arab American writers, but I wasn't reading, I guess, the stories that I wanted to read, if that makes sense.
mm,
And not that I thought I could write those stories at that point, like, not at all, but it definitely made me interested in using my like writing skills in that direction and trying to develop in that direction. And so I ended up doing something kind of wild at the time for me anyway, and I went and did like a master's degree in writing in Scotland, which, like, what I mean, like, is not the, I don't know, most sensible thing you could do with your like time or money, or like, and but yeah, that's really where a lot of this, the stories in this collection were born. And I felt
mm.
like, I don't know how to explain it, I felt like I had saved up all these things in life, and like I and it was like just the right time to like start actually trying to get them out.
Um, Trust me, what you did with this collection and how you brought these characters to life, and showed their complexity, and not like some stories where when we talk about race and religion, that sometimes that's the heavy horse leading the cart, in most of the stories. But here you do infuse that, in very poetic and subtle ways that allow, the autonomy of these characters to stand on their own without having to be so heavy driven about their background, as Syrian, or their Arabic, speaking technique. It's like you infused it there, but
Yeah.
also it doesn't lead. It's not the whole main point of the
Yeah.
story.
Well, I think that was really important to me, because I didn't want I mean, this book to me isn't about like, here is what it means to be a Syrian or an Arab, or and that kind of writing, I think, it's aimed at a certain audience. That kind of like translation of culture, of like, here's my culture on a platter, I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not, yeah, what drives me to write. And so these characters are, of course, Arab American, or whatever iterations, but in really varied ways, and in ways that I, hopefully, when read all together, actually make it really hard to be like, this is what an Arab American is, because of course, like any of our identities, they can't really be distilled, into an easy definition in that way.
No, it definitely speaks as each story. I'm sad I finished it. It's done. But it really speaks to you see kind of the picture of the community, which is it varies depending on the person's will, their character, who they are, and that just speaks to humanity in general. But you showed it in such a poetic and a beautiful way that that's how we should look at one another. However, how we exist within our own cultures can be hard, and even in our place in, say, America is hard. I don't know how much that translated for you when you were in Scotland and in the UK, but I'm sure you used some of that displacement or placement to fuel you when you're writing this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think actually being outside of the US helped a lot in my writing these stories, because they're very much about being an American. And I think it was actually so good to be physically removed and to think about that, especially like when you live in the UK or probably anywhere. Like everyone has an opinion about what's wrong with Americans, and you're like, you actually don't know, because and you get really, I don't know, over time I was like, I'm actually really offended at all the things you think are wrong, because there actually is so much that's good. But also I know, like, you know what I mean? You're like, I actually can be more critical because, I'm actually, grew up there. But yeah, so it's interesting kind of, because like there's all these really stereotypical things that like especially Europeans hate about Americans, but that's sometimes it's just so off the mark. And the things that are actually really good about the US, like I think, I'm going off on a tangent here, but like, when everyone has this conception, most people have this conception in outside of the US, that like Americans are just kind of like the tourists that they see in Europe. But like that's a very particular type of American, and there's kind of no I don't know, there's a kind of no subtle way to say any of this, but there's no real acknowledgement of like the non-white Americans that actually make up this country. It's just like Europeans have this notion of like a Donald Trump figure who's just like prancing around the place, and that's it. And like that's not my experience of the US, obviously. And so but it helped me, all of that actually, being around that, I think helped me write these stories.
I mean, it makes me wonder because of how much of our media is propagated on the dominant narratives. And I just recently watched Turning Red, a new Pixar film. Yeah, I can only imagine how, territories outside the US say, what's a Canadian American or Chinese Canadian American when they're watching this film? What does it have to do with, a cartoon, and our identity, and I'm sure Americans see that, like, what's the Canadian, Chinese Canadian? But that's the thing, our point of view shifts based on our what we are acknowledge or know. So that's great, and that's a whole nother topic in itself, which is like a series in a college course for sure. But we're gonna jump into and I think you decided to pick some stories and excerpts from your book. So I'd like to jump into those and hear some words, and we'll discuss on that.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to read an excerpt from, I think it's the second story in the collection, called Daughters of Manat. Okay, and I'm just going to jump in. My aunt Zainab looked after me while my parents were at work. She was 17 years older than my mother, and her own children were grown and gone by the time I came along. I spent more time with her than I did with anyone else, and for years I thought this meant I was destined to become as ugly as she was. Arthritis gnarled her fingers into claws, and too much bleach made her scalp look like parched earth. You think it matters how shapely your mouth is, how long your nails are? She would say to me, leaning in close enough for me to taste her cigarette breath. On my 10th birthday, she made white cupcakes frosted purple and dropped them off at my school after lunch. As she stood in the classroom doorway holding the tray, she peered around the teacher to find me, her squinted eyes darting among the rows of children. I gave her a quick look of thanks and turned away, hoping no one would see her. That afternoon, we had a classroom party and wore pointed hats. Beneath colorful streamers and floating balloons, my friend Oni kissed me on the mouth in between bites of cake. Disney songs played from a small cassette player on the teacher's desk, and the teacher, Miss Nolan, was busy showing a student how to properly take Harry the hamster out of his cage, how to hold him with cupped hands so he felt safe. Licking frosting off my lips, I giggled at Oni, who smeared more frosting on her mouth and leaned in to kiss me again. But within inches of my face, she was snapped back by Miss Nolan's hands and led outside. I put down my cupcake and looked around at the other kids. I wondered if they had been watching us. What had they seen? Some of them crowded near the window, pushing and pulling one another to get a look. Through the glass, I watched Miss Nolan's mouth move rapidly as she spoke, and Oni's lips tremble like she might cry. A sudden scream caused us to turn away from the window to see the kids who had been holding Harry chasing the hamster across the room. Soon, more than 24 students were on the hunt, trying to catch Harry and put him back in his cage. But the hamster was frightened and wouldn't stop scurrying, kept weaving his way between backpacks and books, desk legs, and human ones. It wasn't long before laughter gave way to shrieks. Papers flew through the air, and kids tripped over one another in pursuit. By the time Miss Nolan heard the racket and rushed back inside, it was too late. Someone had stepped on Harry, and one of his beady black eyes had popped from its socket, dangled at the end of a thin, bloodied nerve, and stared at the carpet.
You write so beautifully in terms of the description, especially in the end point with Harry the hamster. I'm sorry, Harry. It really punctuates what just transpired, and I think you talk about or you graze on this topic in the land of Canaan as well. Of love or affection between two people of the same gender, or sex, and how in culture, in this case, it's the innocence, done in innocence. In other stories, it's a person, a male person who has to, restrain himself from expressing it because in his past life he was taken advantage of, but now he's based on his background or how he feels or how society views him, he has to hide it. These are things that I like the way you kind of show, because that's how sometimes it begins. It's for me, it's innocence, but society will judge it, deem it wrong.
Yeah.
And as the teacher did, was grab the student
Yeah.
and march them out, in a very dramatic way.
Yeah.
That reviews, one judges them, everybody sees it. And I think you have several stories with children who judge, and it's just like, it's tough. I grew up, traumatized. I think a lot of us have, especially if you are outed as other, and you're trying to assimilate and fit in. It really sucks.
Yeah. And at that young age to already, because I think that is unfortunately how it is, you're already being forcefully socialized to behave in a certain way to, you're told very early on what's acceptable and what's not. And it might, sometimes these things are just, they seem like so much bigger than us, these like systems that, that dictate our lives, but these things are achieved by very small acts, especially during really formative times. Like the teacher is really the foot soldier of patriarchy in that scene,
Right.
where her what she chooses to do is actually going to make a huge impact on those little girls who, left to their own devices, might have just had a really lovely moment and exchange together, and instead they already feel guilt and embarrassment that they don't really understand.
It's strange with how, especially if this situation were done in I guess more romanticized cultures, it would be beautiful and innocent. Here based on probably the individual's only, I'm not sure the identity, but I'm sure they're, they're not of the lighter skin fare. And the fact that they did this was jarring to this teacher, and the situation with where these students are, and they didn't want to see that. Also, with the overarching narrative that's happening in the daughters of Manat is, with Zainab, her background is like the contrast of the narrative, who is her niece, named niece, who's witnessing her aunt, who has gone through 3 different, I guess, points in the story of marriage, which happens to her at different points of her life. That also contrasts who she was, but not who she is, but affects her greatly in the way she lives her life. Her first marriage when she was so young, teenager. Second one where she was trying to, maybe make it right, marry somebody else. But the outcome was, especially when it comes to, sadly, when marriage and women, childbearing, and people who judged her because she was unable to conceive. And then, of course, the sleaze of her second husband, such a freaking sleaze. And then the third marriage, or, the elopement, later in life when she said, you know what, screw it. I don't care what y'all think about me. I'm going to dress the way I want to dress. I'm going to love who I want to love. I don't care what y'all think. And it's like, but she's always that same person throughout the whole time. It's just like identity, being who you want to be, expressing who you want to be. But having the world still, force you into a little title.
I mean, definition. That's definitely, I think I was in that story, I was so interested in thinking about, like, well, 2 things. I was thinking a lot about how, especially when it comes to Arab women, how they're framed as like very much oppressed in Western media, and how actually, it's just like choose your flavor of misogyny depending on where in the world you live. And it's just, it's going to take different shapes, and it'll look a little bit different, but really it's going to be everywhere. And in that aunt's particular example, like you said, it's just she was a lot. She was just so much, and not in a bad way, but she had, this wonderfully big personality that from the beginning of her life, society and her family really tried to like contain and really squash and get her to behave. And she kept pushing against it and lashing out and trying then to fall in line. And I don't know, that character I feel like is quite heartbreaking, because it's actually her beauty that is her is her biggest kind of obstacle in the beginning, because she's so beautiful. All of this attention, she draws all this attention, but actually it gets in the way of her just living her life. Everyone's looking at her, and by the end, she's kind of achieved this agency of like, I don't care what anyone thinks of me. I'm just going to live my life. But the toll that's taken on her, like by the end, the girl looks at her as like something despicable, like she's no longer attractive, and the little girl sees that as something really undesirable, and like she doesn't want to be like that. But it's really kind of like what all of these people have done to her over time that have made her that way, and actually her happiness doesn't come from that anymore. It comes from her ability to just be an agent of her own life.
Even her name, means, part of it means beauty, correct? I think. So I had to look it up. I was like, there must be something more in this. So I'm glad there's little things that we can dig through to see what you've interjected to us to read into. So how about reading another one of your excerpts here? This is fun. I love this.
No, I'm having a great time. Thanks, Danny. Okay, so I'm going to read an excerpt from Only Those Who Struggle Succeed. And just to give a very quick background, this is about a character who's working as an assistant at a film studio, and she's trying to like climb the ranks. You know, not at all personally informed. No, but really not. Okay, here we go. That summer also saw the president of the company take increased notice of Lena. It began with an encounter in the mailroom where he reminded her of their conversation the night of the Christmas party and what a rare and enjoyable exchange it had been. The value of the encounter, he suggested, was his ability to speak genuinely and openly with someone who seemed neither fazed nor altered by his status and position. Lena's esteem of the president had remained unchanged in the months since the Christmas party. Despite her boss's dislike of the president and the president's occasional reminders to Lena that her loyalties lay with him and the company and not with her boss, whom everyone knew he had been forced to hire. So in the mailroom, Lena again reiterated her respect for the president and confirmed what she believed he hoped to hear, that her ambitions were to remain with the company and to advance her career within it. It was common knowledge that in order for an assistant at Lena's level to gain a junior executive position, she would first be required to serve as the president's assistant. This knowledge served the president's current assistant well, as he perceived Lena to be incapable of usurping him and hence sought a future in which their promotions would be simultaneous. He to a junior executive office and she to the president's desk. This plan the assistant shared with Lena, and it triggered with her both trepidation and pleasure. Increasingly then, she was asked by the assistant to cover his days off and holidays, a responsibility that furthered her exposure to the president and, the assistant hoped, fostered within the president a feeling of familiarity toward her, one that could not easily be rivaled when it was time for the assistant to be promoted and his replacement sought. So as the summer weeks gave way to fall, Lena began increasingly to work with the president directly, and when the whispers reached her ears that soon his assistant would at last be promoted, she was certain her due would come with his. It was shortly after the whispers commenced then that the president complimented Lena not on the quality or ethic of her work, or even her conviviality and amiable presence, but on her physical appeal. It was a day like all others, except she was ill and had all but lost her ability to speak. The president found her voice, made hoarse and hushed, attractive, sexually so, and he said this without embarrassment, before proceeding to ask for his messages, as if the comment had not been made, or had been and was accepted. This movement, from one comment to another, was so refined as to be nearly imperceptible, and it was only once their exchange concluded that Lena gathered what had occurred. She sensed, however, that to investigate it, even to herself, was a dangerous act, and refrained from doing so.
Thank you so much. And, with this story, it highlights just, very much the unjust nature of, patriarchal influence in this society. But, especially in this Hollywood excerpt, the problematic hurdles females go through for finding equal footing, respect, and, advancement in against their male counterparts, and I feel for Lena in this story. It's like she's trying to do right, but she, feels it out like something's not right. And sadly, she was been forced, manipulated, and coerced into situations beyond, what she wants to be controlled, exploit her for not just her intelligence, but her, the sexual nature that men with weak egos and, overbearing insecurity about themselves tend to do when they use their station in a powerful situation, against women, So I want to know, how, you pulled this story, because I know you just, recently mentioned that you used to work in such a similar industry. And I know a lot of friends who work in Hollywood and LA, and these are not, unfamiliar stories as well,
Yeah.
especially from women.
Well, I think, these are probably familiar stories to women who work in
anywhere,
any industry. But like what I was, I guess, that passage especially, I think captures maybe what I'm trying to do in that whole story, which is like, it's actually really hard sometimes to pinpoint, like when people cross the line, and especially like, when I wrote that, I was thinking a lot about what was happening with Harvey Weinstein and And there's this entire conversation of like, why didn't these women speak up before? And, you know, how can you just suddenly now realize that you've been abused or whatever? But it's actually, it's these really subtle movements sometimes, and they're very, you know, they're obviously very gaslighty, but it's you know, in this instance, Lena is questioning whether or not something inappropriate had actually even happened. And she knows that actually, even if she was to think about it, that nothing good could come of it, because she's, you know, she has no power relative to this man, and he holds the key to her promotion, her career, therefore her livelihood. And that she's better off actually not dealing with it at all, and maybe even being really nice to him. And yeah, I guess, you know, that's, it's really hard, I think, to, I guess I wanted to challenge myself to capture those moments that aren't so clear, because some moments are obviously really clear when it's like, that's inappropriate, or that's sexual harassment, or that, but it's actually, that's not usually how these things begin. You know, they're actually really subtle turns. And they, and yeah, so I think I was interested in that, and in her kind of really trying throughout the story to hang on to the fact that, like, actually she can navigate this, you know, that she can win this kind of battle. But it's, this battle existed before she existed, you know, this is a system that she was kind of thrown into. And she's not, and like trying to like succeed in it is maybe not necessarily success, you know. So it's about her kind of coming, she's really battling herself in the story as to like what, how she might define success, and what yeah, and what she's willing to pay for it.
That was, you know, and I mean, I felt cringy for her throughout this book. And if I feel cringy, then she felt afraid, and yet you know, soldiered on to somehow get through it and believe that there is be a change. But you know, I'm not want to give away the rest of the story, but you know, eventually there is you know, some agency that she grabs for herself, you know. And you know, there's a surprising turn of events, but that's what goes on everywhere, like you just said, you know, in every industry. You know, sadly, this is manipulation used by you know, patriarchal forces that, you know, and systems that have been you know, there for the benefit of men,
Yeah.
and that, you know, we have to dismantle and change, amongst other injustices, you know.
Yeah. It's also like very particularly American in this case too, though, you know, like because she's I don't know, it's something that definitely, it's only when I left the States I thought a lot about, but like it's kind of like, you know, that this like myth of the American dream, and that like if you work really hard, you're gonna make it. And that also kind of like struggling and being abused is like integral to success, that like you have to like feel like crap about yourself if you're going to get anywhere. And it's like how toxic that is. And this is all stuff that, you know, I think especially like young people entering, you know, any career early on, they feel like, oh, it's fine, I'm supposed to like be abused in whatever iteration that is, I'm supposed to be overworked or underpaid or you know, sexually harassed, or, you know, it's part of it, I have to like make it. And it's like whoever can stick it out the long, it's like a weird Hunger Games, you know, whoever can like stick it out the longest and take the most abuse deserves their success. But it's like what a toxic yeah, toxic thing we teach young people.
Which pretty much highlights why, you know, I said only those who struggle succeed. You know, the title itself speaks, you know, as an underlying theme of, yeah, you keep going, you keep getting abused, maybe you deserve to get
You'll
that
deserve
job.
it. Yeah.
That's twisted, but it's not. I've, you know, my experience as a son of refugee with the immigrants with a store, working 7 days a week and saying that's how it is. What are you
Yeah.
complaining about? You know, I'm like, I'm tired. You're like, nope.
Definitely. Well, I think it's also really prevalent in like a lot of immigrant families. You know, they're like, well, we struggled, you struggle, you know, that's life. Like go and yeah, be miserable. And then maybe one day you might be happy.
We wrapped it in the bow for you, so enjoy that.
Yeah.
We got time for one more excerpt before I have some questions for you.
Yeah.
But I would love to get into Alligator.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll read a short excerpt from Alligator. So quick preface, this is about a 1929 lynching of a Syrian American couple in Florida. And there's a lot of speakers. There's many speakers in this story, and this is just one person who's giving his account of what happened. None of the ones who'd seen what happened went on record, but their words got back to us just the same. I don't know if they felt bad. Surprised, I suppose. Years later, the man I sold my shop to wrote to tell me he couldn't get the picture of Nancy lying on the ground of her own shop bleeding to leave his mind. I'm a Southern man and I've seen plenty of death, he wrote, but it wasn't right, a white woman dying like that. I didn't tell Miriam about his letter, but she found it and read it, and the only thing she said was, that man wasn't even there. How many were indeed known to us, these unknowns? How many of these men had walked into our grocery stores, sent their children to buy milk or butter or a piece of candy? How many of them stopped by for a glass of water, said hello and goodbye, and asked after our families? Some had to have been our customers, our neighbors. Some we had to have known for years. Syrians asked the same. Didn't they know us, these men? Hadn't we gone to church with them and sat with them and made ourselves known? Surely they knew we were like them. No answer I gave was enough. Oh, they were angry. They wrote letters and hired lawyers, and I can't say that they did nothing but right by us and the children. They raised funds, collected donations, and the rest. But they kept asking the same questions, and I saw they wanted to hear something I wasn't saying. That maybe it was George's fault, he and Nancy both. Surely they had brought their ends upon themselves. The law is the law, and all we could do is respect it and stay out of its way. Some of them would all but say it and nod until I did too.
Thank you so much. By far, this is the longest story in your collection. Also, one of the most graphically intense, and graphic meaning imagery, as well as the complexity of what you're saying. We were talking earlier, depending on what type of reader you are, you could have either loved this or found it difficult to read. But what I got out of it is how you spoke about a place, which tends to right now in the common news cycle. Florida is a complicated place, but here you're speaking, and by using so many different mediums of news clippings, kind of genealogical information, interview accounts, even a script, you threw in there. We're talking about a lynching of Syrian Americans, but also you speak on identity of land ownership, of forced migration or chosen immigration, of lynching, of how people accept lynchings, a Black lynching,
Yeah.
a white passing individuals lynching,
Yeah.
of who's never accepted,
Yeah.
who's intermarried, the Syrian Americans, the Black Americans during the Civil War, to the Seminoles who were ousted, and then the marriage of of integration of Black Seminoles, who are they accepted even in their own communities. So much. I was like, whoa, I don't know how she did this. She did it. I don't know how she did it. So, how long did it take you to, conceptualize this and bring this all together? Because there's a lot going on here, it's not easy.
It wasn't easy. But I will say though, even though it's the longest story, it actually was one of the most instinctual to write, which is really weird because some of the other stories in the book, they're really short and I probably had to edit them like 30 times. It's weird what comes more easily. But for this, it actually felt like an active excavation, which actually made it maybe more instinctual to write. And that whenever I was writing a section, it would raise so many questions for me. And that if, for example, if I'm writing about a white passing couple being lynched, of course I would be thinking about the Black Americans who were lynched, which is the majority of the people who are lynched in this country, and thinking about like, well, would people, what did those same people that took issue with this lynching, did they actually care at all about Black people being lynched? No, of course not, you know. But like thinking about, okay, well, what is something I can dive into there? What are the things that I'm, you know, curious about? And and the same thing about like setting a story in Florida and writing really about the history of Florida, and that kind of then spawns this whole other set of questions of like, well, what is, like, who lived there before these people lived there? And if we're going to talk about racist violence, we really not, can I really talk about Syrian Americans, you know, dying at the, you know, at the hands of police officers, and not think about Black Americans dying at the hands of police officers, and not think about, you know, Native Indigenous Americans actually, you know, really being driven off their land and killed by what was then the equivalent of like, you know, I guess lynch mobs and law enforcement, and how, what is the kind of thread that runs through all of these things, you know? It's really like asking like, why is the US racist, which is this insane question to ask in a short story, but like that is, you know, like what is the root of this, and how is it maintained, and how does it evolve, because it takes so much reinforcement. And so I really wanted to use this one family to think about, what does it take to reinforce racial hierarchy, and how are the victims of racist violence, how do they become perpetrators of that same violence? So they're not really just like innocent victims, you know, because I think that's a really simple way to like think about racism. It's like, this is the offender and this is the victim, but it's usually, especially for non-Black people of color, like they're usually somewhere else in that hierarchy that's dictated by white supremacy, and everyone's pitted against one another trying to figure out, okay, like where, how much higher am I than you are, and like how close am I to like this white paragon, and then that creates this whole new slew of violence. And so I was more interested in that kind of complexity of of how are these people that, you know, died at the hands of law, what was their relation to race, and then their children's relation to race, and their kind of aspirations, you know, for whiteness.
Yeah, and we see that in them, that family, the generation, there's children, you know, who remember the incident and how they felt, but also that, you know, they were trying to make a life, and this is what occurred to them, you know, that damages them down the line for generations, you know. I do hope everybody else reads Alligator and all the other stories, but this one really, it stuck with me, and it will stay with me for the rest of my life. So thank you for that. Not many stories do that. I can forget a lot of things, but not this one. You know, we got some time for just a few more questions, but this one question, or kind of this thing I read, the novelist and professor Viet Thanh Nguyen, you know, I work with him. I saw him post something earlier this week regarding the current war occurring in Ukraine, you know, and he posted it, and it's a news clipping from the latest issue of Time magazine, March 14th to 21st. And the excerpt is, the US began to warn a rapid escalation, even an invasion. Through it all, Zelensky tries to project a sense of calm. On our visit to the front lines in early April, he spent nearly an hour talking to the troops inside a system of trenches they nicknamed Vietnam, a nod to the mud and morass of a war they have seen in movies.
Oof.
And, you know, of course, like him, I took offense to our portrayal of who we are and our identity. And I think also you would understand that when we are now associated with a war, we are erased of who we can be, what we can be. And much of these stories are about people like that, erasure of who they wish to be and who they were in their history. As a child of who had to carry that still, even though I'm making myself a new person, a Vietnamese librarian, still a novel thing to my family. How much, is it about for us to move forward? How much do we have to carry about the past or what's currently happening in order to move in? I hate to call it assimilation, but sometimes, as we were talking, we'll fight for our American identity, but man, I'll fight against what we're doing, in other countries and to ourselves in this country. I'm not really positioning a question, but what are your thoughts of that, of being a Syrian American?
I mean, you raise so many interesting points, and then but like even just the last few weeks of watching and reading media coverage about Ukraine, and it's just been so interesting, obviously, as an Arab American, in seeing how the power of media to really galvanize people to care about a Russian invasion of Ukraine, but not Russia obliterating Syria, for the last 7 years. And like, of course, it's never surprising because it's like, oh, the dark people live over there and they're just supposed to die. But it was like, oh wow, we're saying this really out loud now, and like, I don't know, I'm sure maybe you saw, but so many commentators just being like, yeah, but this isn't Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq, this is Ukraine. And it's like, do you think that people just grow up in these countries just like waiting to die, or and so it's so, and it's, I don't know, I mean it's so interesting in that way. But yeah, as far as like fighting then for your like Americanness or whatever, I think for me it's like, you have to claim space, and like all I could do is like claim my space as an American, and this is what an American looks like, and not be, because I think the trap is to constantly be in some kind of like conversation with like this utopian 1950s white American, that like actually that's what you're always in conversation with as an immigrant, weirdly, I think. And to kind of really try to try to distance yourself from that, and to think about to conceptualize the US as like something which it actually is, which is a lot more diverse and a lot more multilingual, and because that's actually the reality of where I live and where you live and how I grew up and how you grew up. And so it's really kind of pushing against, like you said, this how like what we send out into the world, and especially to other parts of the world, of like, this is America, but like, to really try to remember that actually it's not, it's a lot more complicated than that, and to try to make I don't know, it's really idealistic, but like change in whatever ways we can, and where we know, like whether it's you through books at the library and the kind of advocacy that you do in that way, and whether it's me writing my little stories, I don't know, but I feel like this is the most American thing I've ever done, which like is actually really funny, because I feel like this is not a book that many people will be like, this is an American book, but like to me it's like the most American thing I could have done is like, I moved to the US and I wrote this book about being Arab and American, and so yeah, I don't know, I'm also not answering a question here, I'm just talking in circles, but that's something.
No, that's great, and I love that that answer, because I think for most of the fiction I'm seeing coming through the shelves from new voices or emergent voices who are finally breaking through, it is the most American thing I am seeing, is the diversity of literature, whether it's coming through translated or it's coming from populations and communities who've never had authors represent them. And maybe, the paradigm of some of, the stories are kind of same, but they're coming from a different angle, different city, different voice. And I love it. Last names are long and they're taking up the whole spine. And I'm like, okay, I can't pronounce this, but yes, let's go.
But you can learn,
We can learn.
You can learn.
We can learn. I'm just going to close. So what do you, what do you have in the future? What are you working on right now?
I mean, there's early rumblings of a thing. I never know what to call anything because I'm like, maybe it's a novel, maybe it's not a novel, but it'll be a book,
That's if you're trying to be subtle, that was not subtle. All right.
I don't know. I'm trying to write something longer and more sustained. Whether or not I can't say, because I think as you saw even in those short stories, they end up doing all kinds of wacky things. So I don't know. Yeah. But I am trying to write something that is definitely grappling with a lot of the same themes in Alligator and Other Stories, and dealing a lot probably with identity and the many ways that we are screwed over by the societies that we live in. So I mean, I think this is all they say writers only write one thing, and I'm okay with that. I'm really probably going to be grappling with these same questions, forever. So if you hated this book, you probably won't like the next book, but if you liked it, then maybe.
The jury's still out, and they've voted already. So regardless of certain voices, I think a lot of people agree that you've written some amazing things, and I can't wait for the future. I definitely, even if you can never talk about it because of NDAs and whatnot, I definitely see some maybe cinema in the future with some of these stories. But whatever you work on, I'm here for it. Any last words, shout outs before we leave?
No, it's all about the Bay. That's all I have.
Hey, that's how we're gonna punctuate it, end it right there. All about the Bay. I do hope that you come when things improve and you have time with your to bring your family up, visit the South Bay. We'll take care of you one way or another at the library, and we enjoyed this talk. So thank you so much, Dima.
Thank you, Danny. This has honestly been one of the nicest hours I've spent talking about the book.
People tell me that all the time, but they're just joshing.
No, you're seriously, I told you before, but you're the coolest librarian I have ever come across, and I feel really grateful that you asked me to speak with you.
Yeah. Anyways, everybody, thank you for joining us for this afternoon here at the Santa Clara State Library with Dima. If anything, please pick up the book. If you haven't read it yet, it's a great read. I read it in every part of my life, from sleeping, waking, and in between meals. And I got through it and I loved it, and I hope for more. But please support your library, support authors, support literature. It's much more than all the content they're throwing at you on, mass media. You want to stop and read the words, smell the roses, and just enjoy. But anyways, I hope to see y'all at the next one. I hope to see you, Dima, and everybody. Please take care of each other. We'll take you at the next crossroads. Anyways, we're in. Cut. Bye.
Bye.